Hello, welcome to the second part of the sessions that I'm doing about mobile app development. In the previous screencast, I've set up a server in Spring and we were able to do some REST calls that return some data in JSON. If you'd like to see that one, just click on the link. This part will be going into the iOS development side. You're expected to have a little bit of knowledge about iOS and Objective-C, since this is not a basic introduction to iOS development. So once we create a new project, we'll be using Cocoa Pods and RestKit. Cocoa Pods is a dependency management tool for Xcode projects, much like Maven for Java. It just makes things a lot easier to use third-party apps, like RestKit, for example. You can find all the installation instructions about Cocoa Pods on their website, which I'll put in the description of this video. RestKit is an Objective-C library that makes the communication between the app and the server a lot easier for us. Not only does it help making REST calls easy, but it also automatically stores the JSON objects into CoreData objects, which I'll also demonstrate in this screencast. Now, the aim of this session is to create a very simple iPhone app that loads the data from the server and displays it on the screen. So let's start by starting Xcode and creating a new project. In the previous screencast you could see that we were creating a pizza app. So in this one I'm just going to call it pizza. We are going to use storyboards and also enable automatic reference counting. Now that the project is created, I'm first of all going to close it because we're going to set up Cocoa Pods for this project. So we're going to close it and start a terminal. Within the terminal we're going to go to the location. Now we're going to create a file that CocoaPod is using. It's called pod file. And within this file we're going to specify two things. First of all, the platform, which is iOS version 5. And second, we are going to specify that we would like to use RestKit as a dependency. I'm using RestKit 0.10.0, which is an older version. They have a later version available, but this one is still going to be about the old one. So we're going to close it and of course save it. And next we're going to run pod install. Now make sure you have Cocoa Pods installed before you do this, otherwise it's not going to work. You can see here Cocoa Pods downloading all dependencies. Not only RestKit, but also all the dependencies from RestKit. We also have to take note from what it says here that from now on we need to use pizza.xc workspace instead of the Xcode project. So let's go back into the folder and open the workspace project. Now what we see here is two projects within this workspace. Here's our pizza project, and Cocoa Pods generated another project which it calls Pods. Now the Pods project contains all the sources of all our dependencies. When we go into the Pods group, we can see here all the dependencies and also all the code. Now our own project hasn't changed much. All that Cocoa Pods did is change a couple of things within the build settings. As you can see here, it created some user-defined properties and it added those properties to header search paths. Also created a config file. Also, if you look into the project, into build phases, you can see that the libpods library that's built by the pods project is already linked. So far, the project set up with Cocoa Pods. So let's get started with the app. First thing we need to do is import RestKit. And now we're going to configure the communication to our server. However, let's first have a look at the server that we created last time. It's running in Spring. Also running in the web browser. You can see our pizza. And also the REST client that I showed in the previous screencast. You can see here the JSON is being returned. We're running here in the local host, so let's use that here as well. So first of all, we're going to create a RestKit object manager, which contains the URL to our localhost server. Then we're going to create a managed object store, and here we're going to specify that it should use pizza.sqlite as the store file. Now note that this is the only CoreData setup in code that you need to do, since RestKit is going to handle everything else. So then we're going to set the object store in the object manager, and we're going to specify as a serialization MIME type JSON. Now this is the basic setup that you need to do for RestKit. Like I mentioned earlier, we'd like our objects from the server to be stored in CoreData. For that, however, we first need to create a CoreData file. So we're going to go into CoreData and create a new data model. In this data model, we're going to make one entity that's matching the server entity. The entity was called pizza, and if we look over here, we can see in our pizza class that it had two properties, a diameter and a price. So we're going to make those as well. This was a string, and the price, which is a float. However, if we look at the JSON, we can see two more attributes, ID and version. These are generated by Hibernate. And also, to keep everything synchronized between the server and the client, and to avoid duplicate objects, we're also going to include the ID here. Also, we're going to specify the version, which can be used by Hibernate for optimistic locking. Once that's done, we can generate our pizza class. Go to File, New, CoreData, and this managed object subclass. And here we have our pizza class. Now we go back to our app delegate, and we're gonna import the pizza class here. Now the next thing we need to do is tell RestKit how to map attributes from JSON to our CoreData. So for the pizza entity, we're gonna specify a object mapping, and then we're gonna map each of our attributes from JSON to CoreData, which in this case is just a one-to-one mapping. The last thing, as I said, we don't want duplicates, so we're also going to specify a primary key attribute. And we're also going to add this mapping to the mapping provider of RestKit. So next, we're going to create a new controller, which we're going to call PizzaViewController, and it's going to be a subclass of a TableViewController. Then let's go to our storyboard and create a new TableViewController scene here. Gonna link it to our pizza view controller, and we're gonna use a cell with a right detail. Also, as a identifier, we're just gonna name it pizza cell. So let's go into our controller. As we can see here, a generated TableViewController. First thing we're gonna do is create a property for our pizza objects that are gonna be displayed within the table view. We only have one section, and the number of cells is of course going to be equal to the number of pizzas. Here, the cell identifier, we said it would be a pizza cell. And then we can configure the cell. First of all, we're going to load the corresponding pizza from our array. Also, of course, we need to import our pizza. So there we have our pizza object, and the next thing is to fill in the cell, and we're gonna set the text label to the diameter, and in the detail text label on the right side, we're gonna print the price. Of course, our pizzas array is just gonna be empty at this time. So what we're gonna do is create a new method. Let's call it load pizzas. And within this method, we're gonna make the call to RestKit to get the data from our server. Also here, we need to import RestKit again. We can see here, we're using the same path as we used in our REST client. And here we're gonna specify a block. Now what RestKit does is, when executing this method, it's gonna specify a RK object loader, which is the actual request and the loader. And within this block, it's giving you the opportunity to do some extra configuration for the loader. So what we need to do here is specify our object mapping, and we want to use the object mapping that we created in our app delegate. And we're going to specify a method that will be called when the objects are successfully loaded. And this is also a block. And these objects will be our pizza objects loaded by RestKit. So we're just going to assign these pizzas and reload the table view. Last thing we need to do here is make sure that this method actually gets called. So let's put it in view.load. So everything is set now, so let's run the app. And there we already see our pizza object. Now, of course, it would be nice to also have some refresh functionality if pizzas are added, that we can actually refresh it. So that's quite simple. Let's go into our storyboard and let's embed this one in a navigation controller. Also going to give it a title. And we're going to add a bar button item. I'll call it refresh. Create an action from it. There we go. And then from our refresh method, we're simply gonna call the load pizzas, since that will already load from the server again and reload our table view. Let's have a look and see if it works. So let's add something on the server, create a new pizza here. Save it. Go back to our simulator, refresh, and we can see our added object. Now, if you get into any trouble loading data, if for example RestKit is unable to map it, it's always nice to see here some extra login. For example, what exactly is loaded from the server. This is quite easy to do since RestKit has all kind of different logging levels. So what we're gonna do is go and edit our scheme, and we're gonna add a environment variable to our configuration. And I'm gonna set the level to trace, so it will trace everything between our server and client. And here we specify which package from RestKit should log. Now, to have RestKit reading these environment variables, we need to do one more thing. Go into the main file, and here we need to add one line of code to initialize RestKit. And also, we're going to import RestKit again. So let's run, see if it works. And indeed, within the logging, we can see the JSON. So we've come to the end of the screencast. We've created a very simple app, and only with a few lines of code we're already able to load all this data from the server. Now in the next screencast, I'm going to deploy the server application into Amazon Web Services.